I just want to do this quick video to analyze the state of emergency that Yahya Jammeh declared in the Gambia. So I'm going to go through this book. It's called the Constitution of the Republic of the Gambia. This is the little grey book. It's a bit old now. They have done a lot of amendments because this was last printed in 2002. Now they've done a lot of updates since then, but I'm going to talk about the amendments that were done and then the part of this book that is still extant, that is still the law in the Gambia. So firstly, state of emergency. That's what Yahya Jammeh declared today. Now, under the Gambian law, the president can indeed declare a state of emergency, and that is provided under Section 34 of the Constitution of the Gambia. And 34 states, the president may at any time, by proclamation published in the Gazette, declare that a state of public emergency exists in the whole or any part of the Gambia. And it further went on to state at subparagraph 34(1)(b), it states that a situation exists which, if it is allowed to continue, may lead to a state of public emergency. Now this is the big question, a public emergency by definition, and what one can basically understand from what the drafters of this constitution would have intended, and that which the Gambian people who voted for this constitution would have understood it to mean, is a situation that actually happened in 1981. A lot of you may not know what happened in 1981, or may not have been there when the Kukoy Sambasanya failed coup that happened in the Gambia in 1981 happened. Shortly after that, the then President Jawara invoked what was a provision in the old constitution of the Gambia. That was the constitution of 1970. That constitution, there's a similar provision in that as well, and that is about public state of emergency. And that is what Jammeh is trying to claim has happened or is happening in the Gambia. Now, Jawara invoked state of emergency under that constitution shortly after the 1981, and the duration of these declarations are meant to last only for 90 days. So there was basically a threat to public order in the country, to the law and order of the country at the time. And we know what happened. The government of Jawara was overthrown by Kukoy and his boys, and that was the reason why President Jawara had to declare a state of emergency shortly after. What we have today, and this is one of the things that I want to emphasize, and that is this: the drafters of this constitution and the Gambian people who voted for it in 1996 during the referendum could not have envisaged a scenario that we have today as justifying for the invocation of that state of emergency. Because you have to understand one thing, and this is what we need to understand. Yahya Jammeh, there are two provisions of the constitution at play here. One is under section 63 and the other is under section 34. Section 34 gives the president a right to be able to invoke state of emergency, to declare a state of emergency whenever the public safety of the country is under threat. But there is another section called section 63 which says that the president should hand over power, and that is section 63(2) of the same constitution. It states that the president should hand over power when his mandate comes to an end, and Jammeh's mandate is about to end on the 19th of January. Jammeh is meant to hand over power. He's meant to cede power to the president-elect who has been given the mandate of the Gambian people. So what Jammeh is trying to do, he's trying to use one provision of the constitution, which is section 34(3), which gives him right to declare a state of emergency and extend his term to 90 days or give himself a 90 days grace. He wants to use that provision of the constitution in order to bid the obligation that he is under the other provision of the constitution, which is section 63(2). Because what we have to be clear and understand here is that if Jammeh fully complied with the provisions or the obligation or the duty he is under section 63(2) of the same constitution, we wouldn't be having the scenario that we have today. But Jammeh is willfully and blatantly trying to avoid complying with the provision or the duty of section 63(2) of the same constitution, which states clearly that he... Sorry about this, someone just called and then that interrupted the video. So what Jammeh is trying to do, basically, he's trying to use section 34 of the provision of the constitution of the Gambia, section 34. He's trying to use section 34 in order to bypass or in order to beat or to avoid the duty he is under section 63(2) of the Gambian constitution to hand over power peacefully to the president-elect Adama Barrow. So this is what people who have been saying that this is an abuse of the system or abuse of the constitution have been trying to explain to you. It's just this, basically. He is under a duty under the constitution of the Gambia, under section 63(2), to hand over power to the president-elect immediately on the date that his mandate comes to an end. Jammeh's mandate starts on the 18th of January 2012 and is meant to end, the 5 years is meant to exactly end on the 18th of January 2017. The constitution said he should hand over power peacefully. That is what the constitution said. He is under a duty, under an obligation of that constitutional provision to hand power peacefully to the president-elect who has the will of the Gambian people, and that is President-elect Adama Barrow. So what Jammeh is doing is he's trying to avoid the obligation he is under that provision by invoking or relying on another provision of the constitution, which is section 34, that gives him the power or authority or the right to declare a state of emergency. But a state of emergency, as the constitution, and this is the constitution again, this is the constitution of the Gambia. It's a green book. It's a bit of an old one, but it is the handbook or the handbook that they have there. The other amendments are still not probably published, and this is from Timbuktu. Now, this said, what this states here is that he can only do so where a state of public emergency exists. Now, as I said, a state of public emergency is where there is a threat to the law and order of the country. Now, you tell me, is there a threat to the law and order of the country? And what Jammeh failed to understand, and this is the narrative that they are going by, is to try to tell the Gambian people our constitution is supreme to any other treaty obligations that we have as a nation. But what he failed to understand is in 1990, the Gambia actually signed an accord with the rest of the West African countries, ECOWAS. And the accord they signed brought about what we call fundamental principles. And those fundamental principles is what ECOWAS is invoking now to try to intervene in the Gambia, because we were not only signatory to that, we were the drafters of that accord. President Jawara was one of the masterminds behind this whole ECOWAS regional bloc and peacekeeping force. He is the mastermind of it. So the Gambian people are one of the founding fathers of ECOWAS. And what we said as part of the fundamental principles of ECOWAS, and this is one of the lies that Yahya Jammeh keeps going on about. He said it is a cardinal point or cardinal principle of the ECOWAS fundamental principles that of non-interference. This is what he said: no state should interfere in another country. That is quite simply not true. ECOWAS principles of ECOWAS stated quite clearly that ECOWAS must ensure the promotion and consolidation of democratically elected systems of government. And that is exactly what we are having in the Gambia. So Yahya Jammeh wants ECOWAS to do as he is doing and refuse, and blatantly refuse, to comply with a legal obligation or a civic obligation that they are under, and comply with that civic obligation that ECOWAS is under, to ensure the promotion and consolidation of democratically elected government in the Gambia, which is part of the sub-region. And one of the other fundamental principles of ECOWAS Charter is that of maintaining peace, stability, and security in the whole sub-region. And when they said the whole sub-region, they do not exclude the Gambia from the whole sub-region, because we are part of the region. You minus us there, you don't have the sub-region, because the sub-region gonna have that vacuum or that void in the middle there, and that is Gambia, which you are trying to minus there. So ECOWAS is simply trying to comply and implement an accord which Gambia did not only sign, but we are the founding drafters of it. We are the initiators of that. We brought it into force. We were the masterminds of it. And they are only trying to implement that. So what Jammeh is declaring as a threat to the public safety, and this is one of the other things I also want to make clear, is this: the Constitution is there to protect the public and the people of the Gambia, every one of us. It is not there just to protect Yahya Jammeh and Yahya Jammeh's interest. Yahya Jammeh keeps talking about the Constitution, and he wants to bit everybody. He wants to win that narrative about the Gambian Constitution as if he is probably the most educated and the most erudite lawyer that we have in the Gambia. But he is not, because the Constitution of the Gambia is quite clear. Yahya Jammeh is already trying to abuse that Constitution. He's trying to avoid an obligation of that Constitution, which is to hand over power peacefully under Section 63 subsection 2 of the Gambian Constitution states quite clearly: the person whose mandate is ending must go down, and the person whose mandate is starting must take over at the date that the other person's mandate is ending. So that is an obligation under the same Constitution on Yahya Jammeh. If Yahya Jammeh complied with that obligation of the Constitution, he wouldn't need to invoke Section 34 of this Constitution. He doesn't need it. He doesn't need to invoke it. So you cannot, they said in law, he who comes to equity must come with clean hands. You cannot rely on the Constitution when you are abusing, when you are in breach of that Constitution. So he's trying to rely on Section 34 of the Constitution to say that I am a president, I have a right. Because Section 34 states, and this is one of the things that is happening today, it states quite clearly the president can declare a state of emergency if, as I said, the conditions are met. And those conditions everybody understands. The drafter, the person who wrote this Constitution, or the drafters, it might be more than one person. The drafters of this Constitution, when they drafted it, they knew what they were intending. This is one of the things that when lawyers go to court and they're trying to interpret a constitutional provision, some of the things that we always argue is about the intention of the drafters. So we will say the drafters could not have intended or envisage a situation which is happening now, which is an abuse of this Constitution, and give a sanction to such. No, they could not have done that. And that is exactly what we have in what is going on today, because we have a president who is under an obligation under Section 63(2) to hand over power peacefully to the person who has won the mandate of the people, but he is blatantly trying to refuse to comply with that, and he wants to just come to rely on this one to circumvent that obligation. And that is what is happening here. So this declaration that is made in Parliament is not in compliance with Section 34. It is an abuse of the Constitution because it is not the intention that is necessary or required by the Constitution or those. And this is another crucial thing, because remember, this Constitution came to effect as a result of the referendum that happened in 1996, which the Gambian people went to vote. Now, the Gambian people could not have voted a situation that we have today, where the president is trying to use a provision of the Constitution to subvert their own will. That is exactly what we have in what Jammeh and his National Assembly are trying to do, is to subvert the will of the very people who they claim to have this Constitution from. Because it is the people who voted in 1996 in order to pass this Constitution into law, in order to give it that legal effect in the country. Could you imagine those people having, could you imagine those people having such an intention to have the sort of abuse that is going on today? Can anybody imagine that could have been their intention or sanctioning such an abuse that is happening? It is no. That is not what the drafter who drafted this or drafters who drafted this had also intended. That is not what was voted. And a state of emergency that we have today, the public safety issue we have, is a man-made one. It's one man-made, one man self-inflicted one, and that is designed and masterminded by one person who is quite simply trying to avoid an obligation that he is under Section 3 of this Constitution. So basically, that's what I want you to understand. The issue is this. Yahya Jammeh is trying to say, constitutionally, I have power to declare a state of emergency. But hold on here. The Constitution also requires you to hand over power tomorrow, that your mandate is finishing tomorrow and you do not have any more mandate. The Constitution could not have envisaged a situation where a person or a president would have only 2 days left on their term of office and they're just simply declaring a state of emergency just to be able to extend that to 90 days. No, that is a clear abuse of systems. That is a clear abuse. The Constitution states he must hand over power as soon as his mandate comes to an end. And his mandate is ending tomorrow. What it requires of him to do is to hand over power mandate of the people to rule from the 19th onward. Now, he is trying to run from that obligation and coming to rely on this Section 34, which states that the president can, and I repeat that, it says the president may, at any time by proclamation published in the Gazette, declare that a state of public emergency exists. At any time. That is what they are abusing. So they want to try to tell you that even they have 2 days left to their mandate, they can declare. This is why I don't like doing videos, because you always get people calling and those calls tend to interrupt. So basically, at any time, yes, at any time you can do so, but there must be, as it was clearly stated at B, the situation must exist. Situation must exist, which, if it is allowed to continue, may lead to a state of public emergency. Now, a public emergency, as I said, has to be a threat to the law and order of the country. Now, the only person who is a threat to the law and order of the country at present is the man who is trying to rely on that provision of the Constitution, and that is the president himself. He is the threat to the law and order. He is the threat to the public order at present. So Gambians must understand one thing. What is happening here is Jammeh trying to invoke Section 34 in order to circumvent, to avoid the obligation he is under Section 63 2. Section 63 2 made it clear that Yahya Jammeh, at the end of his mandate, must hand over power peacefully. That's what the Constitution stated. That's the obligation on him. He must hand over peacefully. It cannot be handing power through the barrel of the gun or whatever. I never heard of that happening anywhere, but that could never be the intention one could deduct from the drafters of this constitution. So the drafters of the Gambian constitution never sanctioned the situation that we are having today. And what Yahya Jammeh needs to understand, and Gambians need to understand as well, is that ECOWAS is acting upon a mandate that which the Gambia signed, and we did not only sign during the era and the presidency of President Darboe Analyses. We were the actual drafters of it. If you want to know that, you have to read the book written by Hassan Jallow. He was one of the former lawyers. I think he calls it Road to Justice, or it's a book that I have read 1 year ago or so. But it's one of the things that he is saying. Okay, I'm getting a lot of calls, so I'm going to try and conclude now. Not only were we the brain behind the drafting of ECOWAS Charter alone, we were also the brain behind the AU human rights, the African Charter for Human Rights and other stuff. Sadauda and President Senghor were the people behind that. And then you also had President of Sierra Leone, I forgot his name. They were the people, and then Nyerere and other people in Kenya, they were the masterminds of that. And that is detailed in Hassan Jallow's book. I read that in Hassan Jallow's book. So the ECOWAS is only implementing and trying to enforce a provision under the ECOWAS Charter we call the fundamental principles of ECOWAS Charter, and that clearly states that ECOWAS must ensure the promotion and consolidation of democratically elected government systems throughout the region. And they are also under fundamental principles duties to make sure that we have region, and Gambia is part of that sub-region. So if we have instability in any part of Gambia, it's an instability within ECOWAS, and ECOWAS is under a duty which we were the drafters of, to make sure that Gambia doesn't become that part of the region that is having instability. So be clear on one thing. Yahya Jammeh is already under a duty under section 63(2) of the Gambian constitution to hand over power peacefully. He's trying to run away from that obligation by running to this section 34 and declaring state of emergency. It's dodgy, it's a fraud, is theft, and we should not allow it. It's a crime, and it is terrible, and it's something that nobody should accept. Gambians must all be clear about this. We must all be armed with this information. So anybody asks you in any television interviews you have, in any radio interviews you have, you must make it clear to everyone that what is happening is two constitutional provisions are at play here. The first one is a constitutional duty on this man to hand over power. He's trying to run away from that obligation by trying to simply trigger the other one, and he wants to rely on that. You just can't do that. The constitution, you can't run away from one and try to rely on the other. That is not right. The constitution wants you to comply with everything. If he complied with section 63(2), the parliament did not need to make this one. There wouldn't have been a need for a state of emergency to be declared today. That is what I want to tell you all, and we all have to understand the argument. The argument is simple. Yahya Jammeh, try to comply with the constitutional provisions 3(2) before you think of invoking 1B or 1A and B of the same constitution. And that is what is happening. The constitution said if the state of state of emergency is declared, it can only last for 90 days if it has parliament sanction. That's what they want to do. But before you do that, first and foremost, comply with section 63(2). Yeah? And there is nothing in the constitution that also prohibits Yahya Jammeh, even after declaring a state of emergency, still handing over power and then Barrow continue with the state of emergency, because the constitution did not say that it has to be one president who can declare it, and that one president has to be there for the duration of it. That is not clearly there. I mean, it's not here. I haven't seen it here. It's not here. And I have the book. And as I told you, it's not like I'm reading. This is the book. It says Constitution of the Republic of the Gambia. I have it here, and that's what I'm reading. And it did not say there until the end of the 90 days. No, you can still declare the state of emergency with section 63.2. So you can declare your state of emergency and then still allow Barrow to take over power on the 19th and let Barrow continue with emergency if he wants to. Because also, and this is what I need to also make clear, and that is that section 63, subsection 3, this is section 34, the state of emergency here. Section 34, subsection 3 state, a declaration made under subsection 1, which is the declaration of state of emergency, may at any time be revoked by the president, by a proclamation, which shall be published in the Gazette. So if Barrow comes tomorrow, Barrow can make a similar declaration revoking the other one. But the Constitution did not state that Yahya Jammeh, who declares the state of emergency, has to be the one who has to see the term through. So even when they come to that argument, you can also tell them that. The Constitution did not state that. It says the president. And we know that from the 19th of January, the president changes, but the person still maintains the title, and they still remain being the president. So the title remains. If the title remains and the Constitution did not say it has to be one president, then we shouldn't have a big deal. Yes, go ahead and declare your state of emergency, but remember one thing, that you are still under a duty under section 63. President, and they can decide whether they want to continue with that state of emergency. And I want you all to go out there armed with that information. Decide whether he wants to continue with the state of emergency or whether he wants to change that. We're a bit confused about it all, and they wanted to understand it. But you have to understand there are many provisions of the Constitution at play here. Section 63.2 of the Constitution made it clear that Yahya Jammeh has to hand over power at the date when his term or his mandate comes to an end. Yahya's mandate is ending on the 18th, that is tomorrow. He then has to hand over. The Constitution, the provision he invokes, section 33, the president has a right to do that. But it did not say that it has to be just one president. So Yahya Jammeh can indeed have a right to invoke section 34, declare a state of emergency, but that shouldn't stop him from complying with section 63.4. Yeah? And then this doesn't mean that, because the provision of this one does not quite clearly state that by declaring this mean that the Constitution is suspended. I don't think that can be simply because the same Constitution made that provision. So if you're relying on the Constitution, it cannot be suspended. It is still extant. It is still the same Constitution that continues. Because if you try to claim that the Constitution is suspended, then the very provision you are relying on would be suspended as well.